The arrival. The dusty town of Willow Creek baked under the late afternoon sun, its one street shimmering in the heat. A lean man stood near the hitching post in front of the general store, his hat pulled low to shade his eyes. Luke Callahan had been waiting for the mail-order wagon since morning, his boots planted firmly in the dirt, his jaw set as if carved from stone. He was not a man of many words. Folks in town called him the loner rancher. He had his cattle, his land, and his silence, and for years that had been enough. But running the Callahan ranch alone had grown harder, the evenings emptier, and though he never admitted it out loud, the loneliness was gnawing at him. That was why he had written the letter. A simple letter to an agency in St. Louis, asking for a wife. Someone gentle, hard-working, and, if the truth were told, slim. He needed a woman who could keep up with ranch chores, someone he could imagine by his side without trouble or fuss. When the creak of wheels and the clop of hooves reached his ears, Luke's head lifted. The stagecoach rattled into town, throwing up a cloud of dust. He straightened his vest, tugged his hat brim down a little lower, and braced himself. The door of the wagon swung open. His breath caught. A woman stepped down, not at all the picture he had painted in his mind. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and round in every place a man didn't expect. Her traveling dress strained at the seams, her cheeks were flushed from the ride, and when she set her feet on the ground, the wooden step groaned under her weight. Luke blinked hard, certain he was mistaken. But then she looked at him, straight at him, with eyes the color of summer sky, bright and steady, and he knew. This was her. This was his bride. The townsfolk had begun to gather, curiosity pulling them out of the store and saloon. Whispered voices swirled. A rancher's wife was always a topic of talk, but a rancher's mail-order bride who looked twice his size? That would be talked about for weeks. The woman adjusted her bonnet and lifted her chin. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying, the kind of voice that could hush children and soothe a restless colt. Luke swallowed. "Ma'am." He tipped his hat stiffly. "You must be Clara." "Yes." "Clara Hastings." She smiled, nervous, uncertain, but brave. "It's a pleasure to meet you at last." Luke's chest tightened. He hadn't expected this. The letter he had received described her as well-built, capable, and sturdy. Those words had not prepared him for the reality. Still, he could not find it in him to be cruel. "Welcome to Willow Creek," he said gruffly. "I'll fetch your trunk." Clara hesitated before answering. She knew what he was thinking. She had seen it in countless faces before. The measuring glance, the judgment, the disappointment. It was nothing new. And yet, a small flame of hope inside her prayed that this man would be different. The crowd parted as Luke carried her trunk toward his wagon. It wasn't small, but he hefted it with ease, his muscles taut under his shirt. Clara followed, her skirts swishing, her boots stirring dust with each step. A little boy standing on the boardwalk whispered too loudly, "She's bigger than Pa's bull." His mother shushed him, red-faced. Clara's own cheeks burned, but she forced a smile. Luke's jaw tightened. Without a word, he set the trunk on the wagon bed and offered Clara his hand to help her climb aboard. She took it, her fingers warm and soft against his rough palm. He felt the calluses, the strength hidden beneath her gentleness, and something in him shifted, just slightly. The ride to the ranch was long and quiet. Clara tried to make small talk, asking about the cattle, the land, the neighbors, but Luke's answers were clipped. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't welcoming either. His thoughts churned too loudly for easy words. What had he done? He'd asked for a wife, and a woman had come. A good woman, from the look of her. But she wasn't the slim, dainty bride he had imagined. She was more. Twice as much in every way. And he didn't know yet if that was a blessing or a curse. As the sun dipped low, the Callahan ranch came into view, a wide sweep of pasture, a red barn, and a sturdy farmhouse standing proud against the horizon. Clara gasped softly, her eyes brightening. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Luke glanced at her. For the first time, he saw not her size, but the way her face lit up, the way she looked at his land as if it were a treasure. Something stirred in his chest again, but he pushed it down. When they reached the porch, Luke helped her down. "This is your home now," he said quietly, the words strange on his tongue. Clara clasped her hands together, steadying her heart. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I'll do my best to be worthy of it." He looked at her then, really looked, at the courage in her eyes, the softness in her smile. And though he wasn't ready to admit it, Luke Callahan knew his life had just changed forever. The proving. The Callahan ranch woke early, before dawn had fully stretched its arms across the prairie. Clara rose from the narrow bed in what was now her room and laced her boots, her body weary from travel yet brimming with determination. She had not come all this way to fail. Downstairs, the smell of strong coffee and bacon already filled the kitchen. Luke stood by the stove, one hand wrapped around a mug, the other flipping eggs with stiff precision. He looked up briefly when she entered. "Morning," he muttered. "Good morning," Clara replied brightly, smoothing her skirts. "You cook?" "Sometimes," he said. "When I have to." Clara's lips curved into a smile. "Well, then, I'll take that burden from you. Cooking is one thing I do well. Just let me know where you keep the flour and lard, and I'll have biscuits in the oven before you finish that coffee." Luke hesitated, then stepped aside. She moved into the kitchen with a practiced ease, her hands confident, her voice humming a quiet tune as she worked. Before long, the smell of golden biscuits joined the bacon, and Luke found himself sitting at the table, watching her with a strange tightness in his chest. By the time breakfast was set before him, fluffy biscuits, eggs cooked just right, bacon crisp without being burned, Luke realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a meal that felt this much like home. "Thank you," he said gruffly. Clara only smiled, her blue eyes warming. "There'll be more where that came from, if you let me." The days that followed were filled with work. Luke kept to his routines, fixing fences, checking cattle, mending tack. Clara took to her own tasks, laundry on the line, a vegetable garden started near the porch, floors scrubbed until they gleamed. But word had spread through Willow Creek, and whispers carried further than the prairie wind. When Clara went into town for supplies, she heard them. "She's big enough to eat him out of house and home." Poor Luke Callahan, saddled with a giantess. Bet he didn't expect that when he sent for a bride. The laughter stung sharper than thorns, but Clara held her head high. She walked through the mercantile with dignity, her list in hand, refusing to let them see her wound. Luke, however, heard the whispers too. And every time, his jaw hardened, his fists curled. He had never cared what the town thought of him before. Why should he now? But seeing Clara's brave smile as she bore the gossip dug deep under his skin. One afternoon, after a particularly cruel snicker from the saloon porch, Luke turned to her in the wagon. "You don't deserve that," he said, his voice low and fierce. Clara's hands folded in her lap. "I've heard worse, Mr. Callahan. People have been calling me names since I was a girl. It rolls off me now." But Luke shook his head. "It shouldn't. You're better than their small minds." Clara blinked, surprised by the heat in his tone. For the first time, she saw not just the stoic rancher, but a man who was angry on her behalf. Something tender flickered inside her. Life on the ranch slowly wove them together. Luke discovered that Clara was strong in ways that had nothing to do with size. She hauled water without complaint, stitched torn saddles with skill, and even calmed a skittish calf when it broke through the fence. "You've got a way with animals," Luke admitted one evening, watching her stroke the calf's head until it settled. Clara smiled softly. "Sometimes all a creature needs is a little kindness." Her words lingered with him long after the sun went down. That night, Luke found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. When he had sent for a wife, he had imagined a dainty shadow at his side, someone who would not trouble him, someone easy to ignore when work was done. But Clara was impossible to ignore. She filled the house with warmth, the air with laughter, the land with life. She filled him, too, though he was not ready to admit it. The turning point came during a storm. A sudden summer squall rolled across the prairie, lightning splitting the sky, rain hammering the earth. Luke rushed out to secure the barn doors, shouting for Clara to stay inside. But she followed anyway, skirts plastered to her legs, hair clinging to her cheeks. Together, they fought the wind and rain, lashing ropes around the doors, dragging terrified livestock into shelter. When a beam cracked loose and nearly crushed him, Clara's strong arms shoved Luke out of the way, taking the weight against her shoulder until he could secure it. By the time the storm passed, they were soaked, breathless, and trembling, but alive. Luke stared at her in the lantern light, water dripping from her lashes, her chest heaving. "You saved my life," he said hoarsely. Clara laughed, though her teeth chattered. "Reckon we saved each other." Something broke open inside him then, something he had been holding back. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the wet skin. She didn't pull away. The following days carried a new gentleness. Luke found excuses to sit with her on the porch, to listen when she hummed while mending, to ask about the life she had left behind. Clara, in turn, saw the loneliness in him, the years of silence carved into his soul, and she offered not pity, but companionship. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, Luke finally spoke the words that had been burning in his chest. "Clara," he began, his voice rough, "when I wrote for a bride, I thought I knew what I wanted. I was wrong." She turned to him, her hands stilling in her lap. "I didn't expect you," he continued. "Didn't expect your strength, your courage, your heart. You're more than I asked for, more than I deserve." Her throat tightened, eyes shimmering. "Luke." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling gently around hers. "If you'll have me, not just by contract, but by choice, I'd be proud to call you my wife." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "I came here praying you might see me. Really see me. And you do." "Yes, Luke. 1,000 times yes." The prairie wind carried their laughter, mingling with the hush of the land. And for the first time in years, the loner rancher felt whole.